Dear guests and colleagues, I'd like to welcome you at the third Sitecore user group meetup in Belarus. We will have another 3 hours of cool knowledge sharing today. We have again a very nice special guest from the Netherlands.
Thank you.
Rob Habraken. Thanks a lot for joining and supporting our event. Rob will talk about Sitecore on Azure, web apps. The next presentation will be about data exchange framework, a very trending module on Sitecore, released quite recently. And finally, we will talk about Sitecore Helix. So, Rob, you're very welcome.
Thank you. Let's start. Thank you all for being here. I'm going to tune it down a little bit. I'm going to show you Sitecore 8.2 Update 1 on Azure Web Apps. And I'm going to do that by telling what it is, but I'm also going to show you how it's being provisioned and deployed. So let's first start with an introduction, and I should immediately say something, and that is what you're about to see is not released yet by Sitecore. So the thing I have is an early access MVP preview, so I agreed with Sitecore that I could show it right here to you all, because I really wanted to do this presentation, but we cannot share anything yet on the internet until update 8.2 update 1 is released. I blogged earlier about it that it would come early November. Right now I expect it to be on next Monday, but not sure. Why Sitecore and Azure? Well, Azure has a whole lot of good stuff for us that we can leverage with Sitecore, and we haven't been able to leverage it how do you say? We weren't able to leverage all the features of Azure by using cloud services before. So a few things, it's infinite scalability, it's always on, so you don't have to worry about that. It's very easy to provision. You can pay as you go, and of course, the integration with all .NET components is very, very good. You have 3 hosting models in Azure. That's virtual machines, cloud services, and web apps. Probably you know all of them. And web apps is really the new platform as a service standard. Used to be called SaaS sometimes, but now it's really seen as the new PaaS solution. The old Azure module of Sitecore and 8.1 and earlier releases were using the cloud services, so now we're moving one step up towards the web apps. Web apps have a lot more agility, easier to manage, but you still have pretty much, or actually a whole lot of control of your system. There are some disadvantages, but we'll go into that later on. So what has changed when Sitecore went from cloud services to web apps? First of all, the now deprecated Azure module required a lot of custom configurations and hard work. We recently released a new website on it, so I have the experience in the cloud services. It wasn't really easy. And now with 8.2.1, it was easier to provision it to Azure than to install Sitecore locally. So I think that tells a lot to us. And Sitecore is also provisioning boilerplates, providing boilerplates provisioning scripts for all the different seats, so of the consumer-based license model, XP1, XP2, etc. It's going to deliver all the scripts to provision it by default. You can customize them to your own likings, but this is what they are going to do. So the old cloud services required a custom deployment. Now we have out-of-the-box provisioning. Deployment on cloud services took between 20 and 45 minutes per server. And now we're going to deploying once per server type. So if you have like 10 delivery servers, for example, you only deploy once, and it's really fast. It's in minutes. You couldn't do automatic scaling. You could use services for that, like Cloud Monix, for example, but not out of the box. And with web apps, you now can scale out of the box. The support for modules will be better, and the maintenance will be a whole lot better. So, okay, wrong button. So the comparison is like this. It was cool, it's going to be a lot cooler. Easy deployment, easy scalability, and easy productivity. So how to provision and deploy? What's the idea behind it? You have these building blocks that your site is made up of. First of all, of course, the web apps. There are different web app roles, site roles like content management, content delivery. You host them on web apps, and each web app is placed in its own app service plan, so you can do the scaling per server role. Sitecore uses application insights as a default logging mechanism, so the log files on your server locally, those files, gone. Don't have to use them anymore. Very good. Application insights has a lot of features to do help monitoring and check the telemetry of your system. Azure Search will be replacing the Lucene as the default search engine, which is easy to set up, and it's a SaaS service as well. You can still use Solar or Coveo if you like, but Azure Search is going to be the new default. Azure SQL, the databases, that's not quite surprising. You could already use those with cloud services. Redis Cache will be available, and that is very cool because it wasn't supported between version 7.2 and 8.2 because Redis Cache didn't have the on-session end event, so you couldn't store your MongoDB data, your XDB data into MongoDB. And from now on, you can. So Redis Cache is very easy to set up, and the last one is MongoDB. Two options. There are a lot more options, but the two most likely options are a virtual machine hosting MongoDB within your subscription, or using MLab, and that's what I'm doing for this demo. The deployment strategy is that you split provisioning, deployment, and hosting by initially provisioning your whole environment, deploying locally. You only deploy the delta to the provisioned environment, and the hosting, like scaling and geo-replication, is all managed in the Azure portal. So it's not part of your deployment. You deploy the code that's over a provisioned instance, and it's a good separation of concerns, and it's faster too. So a deployment example would be if you start the provisioning script, it will create the delivery service, content database, collection database, session state, that's Redis, Azure Search, the management server, content databases. It will also link them all together. So it will set the right rights, it will set the right connection strings, it's going to add a reporting database, processing server, all in one go, and you have help monitoring with application insights over your whole provisioned environment. So that's very cool and very quick. Scaling out, those who use Azure probably already know this, but you can very easily say, okay, manually I want 4 instances, for example. Doesn't require a new deployment. And you can also do this based upon metrics. So you can say, if the CPU percentage of my server goes above 70%, spin up an extra machine, but do not do more instances than like 8, for example. There's something you should know, and that is that currently it seems to be buggy to deploy once if you have a whole lot of instances up and running. So the best practice is create a staging slot with 1 instance, deploy to that, scale up afterwards, then switch the staging slot. That's the process that works best. And lastly, scaling up instead of out is also very easy in Azure. You just click another plan and it scales up your machine. Doesn't require a new deployment. So how is the new deployment process going to be? Well, there's some breaking news, and that's Sitecore will become available on the Azure Marketplace. So you can could go into Azure, into the Marketplace, and install it without any tooling, without any knowledge of how Sitecore should be provisioned, and you have a vanilla Sitecore installation. Okay, you have to deploy your own installation on top of it, but it's very easy. Also, no customization in the provisioning process, but it's cool that it's possible. It's bring your own license, so you cannot buy via Marketplace, but you can set it up via Marketplace. The other one that we're going to look into today is using the ARM templates. It's PowerShell-based deployment, and you can deploy both a vanilla or a customized Sitecore environment. And it requires some technical skills, but you will see in a minute that you can't call it a skill. It's just a few commands, and it's very easy. ARM templates are the Azure default way of provisioning, and it's using JSON. It's a really easy format, and you can alter it yourself. So Sitecore gives you a starting point. You can provision it using the scripts delivered by Sitecore, but you can also edit them, customize them to your own liking, and change things to it, and use it as a default provisioning. And what I told you, it doesn't only provision all resources, but also the connections between the machines, or instances, I should say. You can do it for initial provisioning. That's what I'm going to show you, but you would also be able to use them for continuous deployment. It uses web deploy and DACPAC packages. The DACPAC packages are used by SQL, and you can install a SQL database very easy by just locally you can import a DACPAC package, and in Azure you can just create one based upon those. And it contains both the files and the content and everything. The prerequisites for using those ARM templates is very easy. You have to have PowerShell 4.0. You have to install the latest PowerShell commandlets from Azure, .NET Framework 4.6, and a running MongoDB instance. Okay, this one is I'm going to go a little bit faster over here, because I think most of you already know, but the commandlets of Azure are actually a set of commandlets to manage your Azure environment exactly the same as you would do in the portal in your browser. Very powerful. And this is just in there, so if you're looking at it later on, and I can send you the presentation when it's released, then you can use these resources to look it up. Make sure your execution policy is high enough to be able to do this, and you can simply run install module Azure Resource Manager and the Azure module. And then we're going to start with the provisioning. And what I'm going to show you fits on one slide, and that's all. First, you inject your MongoDB connection strings into the ARM template, because it has to know where the MongoDB is. Secondly, you make up a username and password for your SQL. Doesn't have to be an existing one, it's just what it's using to create the SQL databases with. You point your PowerShell script to the ARM template and the parameter file, and you enter your name of your resource group, the location where you want to provision. I chose West Europe, but Azure has a lot of available locations in it. And your Azure subscription ID, and then you run the PowerShell script, and that's literally all to provision it. Then it takes like 20 to 30, well, 25 minutes to spin it up, mostly taken up by the Redis cache that needs to be provisioned. And that's all. Then you have a vanilla website running. So it's these steps. And that's what I want to demo you right now. I'm going to switch to my desktop. Yeah. Okay. So this is my solution I've created for this demo. And here we have the provisioning. This is what Sitecore delivers you. ARM templates, a PowerShell script. The ARM templates, well, we do not really have to open this, but this is the template that provisions the whole environment. And this file, and I need to switch my screen to there. Can everybody read it? Yeah. Okay, so it contains your MongoDB connection strings. This is all test stuff, so it will be disabled when the video is shared. So it's not real passwords of a production environment. The connection strings of Mongo, the login information you want to use for SQL, and these are default. That are the Sitecore web deploy packages, SUWDP, and those contains all the file sets and the databases as well, the deckpack files, to provision the different environments. You can use those at this location, works perfectly fine. That's what I did. You can also download them, put them in your own blob storage, so they're closer to the region you're using. It might be faster, but you will may also want to alter them and change them to your own likings. What I've did is, in here, I extracted such a package so you can see what's in it. And it just a regular web deployment package. In the content, this is the Sitecore web root. Oh, one funny thing, the app data folder now contains the data folder. So Sitecore changes one thing. The data folder used to live next to the web root, and now it's moved towards the app data folder. That's for easier provisioning in web apps. So this is where your licenses are. Log files aren't actually used anymore because it's application insights. But this is interesting because I'm using Unicorn, and Unicorn uses this data folder. So I'm going to show you that in a minute. And here are the deckpack files. See, for this demo, for this early access, this is all I got from Sitecore, so I just used the web root over there and installed the deckpack files locally to have a local environment. And I connected local environment via web deploy to Azure, so I can deploy. It works very easy. So back to the provisioning. I have shown you the parameter file that contains the Mongo database connection strings, and okay, I can show you. I'm sure you will believe me, but let me log into. It's a little bit hard on two screens, but I try to manage it. That one. You can use MLab for your production environment, but MLab also has a very cool feature in that you can, I have to make the screen smaller to see everything. You can create a new deployment, and you can pick single node over here, and then you can pick sandbox, and that's a free deployment. So you can just use this for your R&D and your development stuff. And you put in a database name in here, like analytics, for example, and it creates the deployment. Now I have two analytics databases. And you go in here, you create a user, a database user, and that's all you have to do. There's nothing more to it. The database user, together with the MLab MongoDB deployment, will make up your connection string, and that's what you paste into the parameter file of Azure. So we have arranged this. I'm going to delete my demo database. Don't need it. I already made the 4 databases I need. So now we're going back to the PowerShell script that is provided by Sitecore. You see it in here. It contains the name of what I'm going to provision, and I'm going to pick another name because this one is already created. It's the location of where I want to provision it, and the subscription ID. Then you have 2 options of logging in. If you do not enter the service principals, you have to log in via a pop-up from PowerShell, which works fine. But if you want to automate deployments and your continuous integration, it's easier to use the service principal, and you can set this up following the instructions delivered by Azure. Right now, I'm going to go for the manual login, but that's okay. One more thing that I want to show you before we can start the script, and that is, of course, this is not a real license file in here. What Sitecore delivers, you have to replace it with your own license file. And it's recommended to have a full XP1 license so you can test out all the features. But if you're using your partner license, it automatically works. When you go to the ARM templates, there's within this ARM template, I scroll down to the bottom, there's also a location for your application insights. Application insights wasn't globally available, and right now it is available in some regions, but not all. And I found out that the script location in the PowerShell script isn't used for this one, so it crashes, because this was default on Central US, and I was trying to create my own resources in the West Europe region, and it didn't work for me. So I had to change it here as well. A better solution maybe would be to alter this and put in a variable over here that you can use from your PowerShell. But this is the easiest solution. And that's all you have to do to the default scripting. So let's go to PowerShell. I have installed the modules, and I have version 4.0. You can check the modules by listing the modules that are installed, but I'm not going to do that right now. I'm just going to run the script, and it doesn't work because it's a live demo. Project not found. I'm just in the wrong folder, that's all. That's an easy fix, right? Okay, so now I'm starting the script. I have to log on, which I'm going to do, but I don't know it by heart, so I have to copy it in here. I have created a script account that has the full rights. And then it starts provisioning. It checks if the resource group already exists, because the name you entered is the name of the resource group, and it will prefix to all of the resources within that resource group. And it now starts provisioning. This process takes about 20-25 minutes. So normally you can now wait or grab a coffee. We are going to proceed, and I will show you the result afterwards, because it would be a very dull presentation right then. But actually nothing more happens. After this, it just says deployment successful. There's one thing to look for, and that's the provisioning state. This is now succeeded. When it will be finished, it will show you the final provisioning state, and that should be succeeded, because on the top of the script that's delivered by Sitecore, it says deployment successful, but it always does this. Even when your deployment fails, it says deployment successful. So it's just a string print to your screen. You have to look at the provisioning state. Okay, so now I'm going to switch to the Azure portal, log in with my own account, and the resources will appear over here. I'm going to go to resource groups, and it's already started appearing, but it's not finished yet, so I cannot use it. So I will pick this one, which I've prepared for the demo. And over here you can see all the services that's in it. It contains the Redis cache, application insight. As you can see, it contains the databases, and it even contains 2 servers, one for your core and master and one for the web. So it's split for security reasons. And over here, you see all the app service plans with the corresponding apps in it. This is a single provisioning, everything goes automatically. I didn't change a thing to it, so if I now go to the content management server, I can click on the URL, and then Sitecore will start loading. Here it is. This is just a vanilla website running, and I find it quite easy to do this. Of course, when you are going to customize your ARM templates, you will be a bit longer, but once you've set this up, you can very easily provision your new environment. What I did is, of course, there are multiple ways to deploy your custom solution to Azure. If you're using continuous integration, you will probably use tools like TeamCity or Octopus Deploy or Jenkins, Visual Studio Team Services, of course, which has a very good integration. For now, I'm going to click on Get Published Profile, and what it does, it downloads the publishing profile I can import in Visual Studio, and I can directly deploy to this machine. I'm going to start up Visual Studio right now. Nope, that's not what I wanted. Going to start up Visual Studio, and in the meantime, I will show you how easy it is to do scaling. These are the properties of all my of the web app you're seeing, and I should go to the plan service, the release. Yeah, this one, and I can select scale out, and I can just say, okay, now I want, like, for instance, and if I save that, I immediately have full front ends, don't have to redeploy, and in my next deployment to this machine, to this instance, should stop calling it a machine, right? To this instance, then it automatically runs the full. That's a big change. I'm going to open my project. Yeah. Okay. It's going to take a little while. There it is. And for this demo, but I think because we have a little bit less time than I anticipated, I'm going to skip actually deploying a change, because I hope you all believe me that this works, so I just go deploy the default solution. What I did is, this is outside of the web root, of course, so on my folder location over here, you can see, this is my solution, and this is the website. This is a copy from the package I've shown you. And this is my solution I've created, and I only put the stuff in that's the bare minimum for Sitecore. So I have the connection strings, the Sitecore config, global ASICs, web config, just what you do normally. And using Slow Cheetah, I did some changes to it. For example, the connection strings for my local deployment are different. I generated a custom user on my Express database and installed it locally. For Azure, there's a thing I'm still not happy with, and I'm trying to figuring it out. One of the things is that in the portal over here, normally you would be able to manage the connection strings in here. But with the default provisioning Sitecore does, it doesn't work. For me, it's not very much of a problem because I'm used to doing it in the solution, but then you have a problem as well because the connection strings are built up in the provisioning script, so there's no connection string file. But I needed to include this connection string file in my solution to be able to deploy it to my local development environment. So what I did is I just went I went to my web app, and I went into, let's see where it is, to my console. Don't know if you know this, but it's very easy. Of course, you should only use it to look up how something landed in your web app, but this enables you to browse through your setup, and like this. I just type my connection strings.config like this, and I copied it in my solution, and it works. But of course, that's not a very scalable solution, because if you are going to provision it in a content delivery, a continuous delivery environment, you want to script this upfront. But for the demo, it just works fine. So that's what I did over here. I copied it. And to prove it works, I've also installed my my favorite tool, Unicorn. And also because of the data folder change, I had to come up with a trick, because normally when I deploy to my publish to my development environment, I just use a file deployment, the website folder. It's going to record the Unicorn changes within the data folder that's over there. But now I want to ship the Unicorn files into my web deploy. So they need to be in my Visual Studio solution. So that's another dirty thing. I think I changed it to being over here. So the app data folder is actually including the files from the running development environment. So of course, when it's fully released and we know exactly what we are going to get from Sitecore, we have to figure some things out to get this up and running. But for now, I went into the project file. It's in my other screen. Yeah, it's over here. And I did this little trick, which with the wildcard includes every Unicorn file that's being generated. It's always seen as included in your project, and it's being shipped with a web deploy. And that's all I did. So now I can deploy it locally to have my environment running locally and do some changes over there and check my work. And I can also, that should be very fast, right? Yeah. Okay, so it's shipping this back, forward and back. So if anyone has a good idea on that, please let me know. I like to know how you would cope with this. And this web apps deploy is the publish setting I included from the portal. And when I'm now going to run, it's going to deploy all the changes I've made in my solution to Azure. So it's only deploying the Delta over the provisioned vanilla website. And I can show you the live publishing right now. I couldn't do that with cloud services because it takes about 30 minutes, because a cloud service always, that's not what I meant to show. A cloud service always publishes the whole set of files, and web apps do not have to do that. Okay, so no, actually that's all. And I think it's very easy and very useful. I'm going to switch back to my presentation, which is over here. So that was the demo. A few remarks, I've already made those. I have shown a straightforward deployment directly from Visual Studio, but in a real scenario you would use some integration tooling. If you would create, instead of deploying directly to the machine, if you would create a web deploy package, you can store that together with the ARM templates, so you have a full set of a backup recovery. And it's very cool because that's the current state of your environment, and you can use that as an artifact. So that may be even a better idea than just using web deploy directly. But for testing purposes, it's great. And there's another great thing for testing purposes, and that's you can remote debug using web apps. That's very cool, because now if you're running a web app and you don't know what's happening, you can connect your Visual Studio up to the running web app in Azure. Not going to show you the details, but I think this is one of the productivity enhancements of web apps against the other cloud services. Some facts and figures. You can use Geo application. It's not yet supported, will become available shortly, but only if you're really worried about the uptime of a whole data center of Microsoft Azure. The uptime is very high, so you do not actually need it by default. All the integrations that are being used by Sitecore, like the SaaS services, Application Insight, Azure Search, Azure Redis, can be used separately. You can use them in combination with your on-premise, so you don't have to use web apps from version 8.2 update 1. You can use those new services which combine with your on-premise environment, with your virtual machine hosted environment. So it's very flexible. And you can also use your own alternatives. So you're not tied to using Azure Search. You can use Solar, or you can use other ways than using the Redis cache. But this is really fast and easy to set up. The consumption-based licensing model is recommended. Because if you want to leverage the potential of scaling automatically, you do not want a server-based license model. So it might be obvious, but it's worth checking with your customers and contacting your local Sitecore department. And the good thing is that the staging slots do not count in the server-based license model. So if you have a customer that has like 2 servers in his license for content delivery, then you could still use web apps because it's faster, it's better to monitor. You can use Application Insight, so there are still a lot of benefits. But then you have to put it on fixed 2 machines, and you can still use the staging slot to spin up the environment during deployment and swap them afterwards. Web apps do have some limitations, not going into details right now because of the time, but please check those before you are going to migrate. So if you have a very large environment with for example, a very large database or a lot of fields to index, you might turn out to be falling back towards IaaS, and then I would recommend using a virtual machine combined with those SaaS services of 8.2 update 1. If you want to port an existing site, it's possible. There's no migration module or process delivered by Sitecore. You have to do that yourself. But it actually is, it's rather straightforward if you're working outside the web root. If your solution is stateless, excuse me, of course you cannot install additional software on a server. So if your Sitecore solution relies on that, you cannot port that to web apps. The registry cannot be accessed. You have some limitations, but most of the implementations of Sitecore probably wouldn't use those. And very important, shared disk space among all app service plans instances. So if you have 3 content delivery servers, they're all going to be share the same file system. That's why you only have to deploy once. But that also means you cannot have different configuration for your different content delivery service, and it also means that you can't do changes within the file system or store things locally because it's all coming back to one shared disk. Sitecore also delivers sizing advice. Not going to go in it, but for every server they say use this, and maybe in the future there's even going to combine it with the consumption-based model. If you have more users, you should use this sizing, which is very cool. The roadmap will be, for update 1, all I've shown you will be available, and the ARM templates will be XP1, XM1, and XDB1, what I've shown you. We ran the XP1, but it included the other 2 as well. In the future, they will do some improvements on the Azure Search and Application Insights. There will be becoming more templates for other sizing consumption-based models, other seats. They will support products that are not yet supported right now. So if you start experimenting with it and you're still using web forms for marketers, or you're already using Sitecore Experience Accelerator, then you have to wait a little bit. But it's still in one of the next updates. And for 8.3, there will be application compatibility, but of course I expect more in that last page, but this is all I know for now. So, about to round up. What's next? Well, this is the first step. We've seen that it's very easy to deploy. It's a good separation of concerns because your provisioning and your deployment and your hosting management are separated. But now I want to go to the next step and look for the ultimate Sitecore setup. So I've already written blog posts. The first one I should mention, the one about cloud services, which is a little bit older, but I still get some questions about it. That will be deprecated. It doesn't apply anymore. After I went to the symposium of Sitecore, I've written a blog post about Azure Web Apps, what I knew then by going to the symposium, but I didn't have the update yet. What's upcoming is that I'm going to post about what I've shown here. It's probably going to be early December when the final release is out. And I'm going to investigate what, for me, the ultimate continuous integration setup will be. So the things I've mentioned in this demo are going to be replaced by more scalable options, like on how to configure your connection string file and how to use a web deploy package instead of using web deploy directly. I'm going to blog about that as well, and I'm going to build and set up a showcase development environment. That's the plan, with some fellow guys, all Sitecore developers, and we'll start to share this within the community. So we want to set it up and get feedback on it and see it as open source. This is how you should set it up, because it gives way more guidance in how you should provision and maintain your environment. I've included some resources. Those are for sharing afterwards. Of course, the marketplace of Azure, all about ARM templates, web deploy packages, web app, the services that Sitecore is using, and something about the remote debugging I didn't go into in this session. And when I'm going to share these PowerPoint slides with you, then you can use those as a resource to start investigating yourself. And that was my my story about the Sitecore web apps. Are there any questions left?
Okay. Losha. Alexei always have some questions.
For example, is there two different code base for standalone installing Sitecore and Azure support or not?
No, I do not know exactly how it's going to look like. Right now, the early access was only this set of ARM templates, and I was perfectly able to install it locally. And normally you would have like a Sitecore installer, but you would also have release notes, and all of that is not yet released. So that's an uncertainty at the moment. But I guess there will be a local installer as well. Yeah.
And for example, you mentioned that they use Sitecore Microsoft Search. And does it mean that if I will use standalone instance, Lucene will never support it anymore? I mean, content search provider is built over Microsoft Search?
You probably can use Lucene, but Lucene isn't an option when you go web apps. Okay. So that's not supported anymore. The combination The combination doesn't work. But if you're running locally, you could do a few things. You could set up an Azure search in your Azure subscription and connect your local development environment to that. But of course, then you're going to generate costs for your development. And the other option would be to locally use Solar or Coveo and use Azure search in the cloud. That's basically the best options. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, any more?
No more questions? Okay, then
Yeah,
thank you
I
for...
have one question about.
sorry.
So if several CD servers have the same file system, so they will share log files?
No, the log files are going to application insights, and you can search through the log data by browsing through application insights. I didn't have time to show you that now, but it's very easy. You can just click an instance, and you can see what's happening on which server.
So if I have a custom, for example, Log4net logger,
You probably
should
could use your custom Log4net logger as well.
yeah, but
and just
there will
patch
be
it.
mess of logs for different servers.
Yeah, there's still one question. In one of the documentations of Sitecore on earlier 8.2 and early versions, there's like a note that you should incorporate an ID that identifies the front-end server, and this is still a question I have for Sitecore because it's in the documentation right now, but obviously it's not possible anymore, so how are we going to cope with that? Good question, yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
I hope to be able to answer that in a few weeks. Okay, thank you for your attention.